welcome to Pin My Podfics. This is chapter 2, the final flame, and part 3, chapter 2 of the final flame, of a fanfic called After the Fall on AO3 by Innocent with one N underscore reader. Go check them out. And if you saw my last video, this was recorded directly after chapter 2, and chapter 2 was part 2 was directly directly recorded after chapter 1, so my voice might be a bit hoarse. So yeah, now onto the part. The impact still echoed in the air, as if the very ground had chosen to hold onto the memory of the force just unleashed. For a few seconds, the flame clinging to the wreckage seemed to dance more slowly, as though the wind itself hesitated to blow. Dust hung suspended in the dim gray light, filtering through the heavy clouds above, each mote frozen in place, trapped within the moment. Midoriya remained there, unmoving, the pounding of his blood in his ears louder than anything else. His entire body trembled, not only from pain, but from the crushing weight of a battle that seemed that at last to have ended. His entire body trembled, not only from pain, but from the crushing weight of a battle that seemed at last to have ended. The air reeked of iron and smoke, and the lingering heat of the explosions still burned against his wounded skin. A twisted fragment of fuselage groaned in the distance, toppling slowly onto the scorched earth, the metallic crash echoing like the final note of a funeral hymn. Only then did he realize there were no more screams, no charging footsteps, no relentless noise of destruction. The world finally had gone quiet. For a heartbeat, so breathed that it could have been the earth's own sigh, there was no pain, no cries, no fury. Only the sound of wind, dragging leaves, dust, and ghost-like curls of smoke through the smoldering graveyard that had once been a ship soaring through the skies. Midoriya dropped to his knees, his arms hanging lifelessly at his side. Every breath came as a ragged spasm, as if the air itself was no longer meant for him. The blood ran freely, hot, soaking into the blackened earth beneath him like a final offering. Around him, the pasture lay in ruin, scarred by craters, dotted with small fires crackling between shards of metal, soot, and scorched flesh. The wreckage that had carried them here was scattered like bones of a fallen giant. The stench of burnt oil, plasma, blood, and smoke hung so thick it felt like a choking veil draped over the world, and before him lay the misshaped figure of Shigaraki, or what remained of him. The massive body, grotesquely fused muscle, bone, and flesh, was sprawled across the center of the field like a rotting hill. The black veins that had once pulsed the frantic life were now still. Shigaraki's eyes, moments ago burning with hatred and madness, stared into nothing, empty, dead. Midoriya lifted his gaze, his breathing shallow, his left shook. His right arm no longer obeyed him. His hero costume was destroyed, reduced to scorched rags, fused back to his skin by burns and dried blood. And yet, he stood. His chest heaved, his lungs threatening to tear apart, but he held himself upright, and he smiled. It was a broken smile, sad, fragile, as unsteady as the body that bore it. Tears mingled with the blood and soot on his face, hot and heavy as they fell, beyond his will or desire to stop them. It's over, he thought, clinging to those words the way a drowning man clings to the last plank of a sinking ship. It's over. The sky seemed a little brighter, not clear, but less crushing, as if the entire world too had been holding its breath, and now let out a cautious sigh. Midoriya closed his eyes for a moment. The weight of his eyelids felt like an ancient stone. When they shut, the ruined battlefield faded, replaced by a different kind of silence. Not the suffocating hush of destruction, but one that came from within, a place deep enough to still keep its memories untouched. The heat of battle gave way to a random breeze, carrying a familiar scent of home-cooked food. For an instant he swore he left gentle hands brushing his hair back, exactly as his mother used to do when he was a child. He heard the faint sound of footsteps racing across a schoolyard, echo of laughter, the cadence of voices long ago. These memories didn't come as sharp images, but as fragments, a glance exchanged, a half-finished gesture, a phrase broken in the middle of another. It was as though his heart itself was choosing the most fragile, most human moments to remind him of what he had been fighting for. And then slowly the faces began to appear. Bakugo shouting in the middle of explosions. Araka smiling shyly at some cafe. All Might gripping his shoulder and saying, "You can be the next." Ida, Shoto, even Aoyama, Jiro, faces he would never see again. Among them, his mother, holding a notebook with his name written on the cover. "You always wanted to save everyone, Izuku," she said. "But who's going to save you?" He trembled. He took a stumbling step forward, moving closer to the monster's body. He needed to confirm. He needed to see with his own eyes that this thing was no longer a threat. That Shigaraki, or whatever he had become, was finally at rest. "It's over," he whispered, his voice hoarse like a prayer. "I did it." That was when he noticed it. Something. A wet sound, like living flesh being pulled, like muscles twisting in the silence. At first, Midoriya thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. An echo of the battle, the distant creak of cooling metal, or maybe some piece of the ship giving way. But no, something was wrong. The sound wasn't coming from the wreckage, nor from the wind. It was too close. It was close, too close, and it had a rhythm. It became faint. It began faint, like the snap of a taut rope in the dark, but soon grew wetter, more organic. Each snap accompanied by a vicious stretch that made his skin crawl. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, saturated with with a metallic rotten smell that seeped into every breath. A slow, relentless shiver crawled up his spine, like something unseen was touching him from within. His eyes locked on Shigaraki's chest. He, and then he realized the sound was coming from there. He froze. Shigaraki's body was shaking. No, not the whole body. A specific point. The torso. Midoriya saw it. A movement. Pulsing. Rhythmic. As if the heart was still there. Still beating. Even if faintly. No, he breathed, taking a step back, terror flooding through every crack in his exhausted mind. But before he could react, before he could even think, the sound turned into a tear, a grotesque organic snap, like leather ripping and bones splintering under pressure. The final snap wasn't just a sound, it was a rupture. The torn skin slipped open like old fabric ripped apart by force, releasing a jet of thick, black fluid that splattered against Midoriya's face and chest, burning his skin like acid. The stench hit him like a punch, a suffocating mix of clotted blood, rotting flesh, and something chemical, corrosive, that made his stomach churn. For a moment, he thought Shigaraki's was simply falling apart, until he saw what came next. Something moved inside the gaping wound. First, just a glimpse. A pulsating, living mass, laced with veins, glowing a dirty red, as if the very blood inside it was aflame. Then the movement turned violent. Bony hooks and blades of cartilage tore their way out, shelving his ribs and muscle aside in an eruption of flesh and fluid, and they emerged. Tentacles. They moved like starving serpents, covered in black, foul-smelling slime, with bony spikes jutting from their tips like spears. Midoriya tried to react, his muscles screaming in pain, contracted purely on instinct, the instinct to survive. He felt one for all surge, a green flash racing through his body, but it was like trying to light a bulb in the middle of a blackout. The power was there, but diluted, weak as if every thread of energy had to fight its way through a sea of lead. The first tentacle didn't just touch him, it struck like a living spear, slamming into his hip with a sharp crack. Midoriya nearly fell, but another slash blow, snagging around his ankle. The grip was so immediate, he felt the blood bleeding forced upward in his leg, a painful tingling spreading fast. He punched the tentacle, feeling the bones in his hand protest, but the blow sank into its elastic, wet flesh without doing real damage. A third came out from the flank, too fast to block, coiling around his good arm and yanking it down with inhumane strength. Midoriya fell to his side, his face hitting the muddy ground, and before he could rise, two more struck, one clamping around his waist, the other winding tight around his neck. The air vanished in an instant. The pressure was so crushing. He saw black spots crawling into his vision. The tentacles didn't just hold, they pierced. Bony spikes burst from the living flesh, stabbing through his suit and into his skin, locking him in a place like prey caught in the fangs of a predator. He screamed, not just from the pain, but from sheer terror. It was like fighting a sea of snakes with claws and teeth, each pulling in different directions, but all wanting the same thing, to drag him into the pulsing core of that thing. And then, with the devastating force, the tentacle pulled, not like something dragging a corpse, but like something reclaiming something precious for itself. Each yank was a brutal blow. Was a brutal. What? Huh? Each yank was a brutal blow to his stamina, ripping away his breath and strength. Every foot he was dragged, Midoriya felt the ground slipping away beneath him, dirt and wreckage scraping his legs as he was hauled forward. The sound was grotesque, living flesh stretched and tore around his tentacles, each movement releasing a wet hiss as if something were breathing inside the dead carcass. Chunks of coagulated blood and fluid splattered across his face, hot and sticky, clinging to his skin like a second layer. He tried to dig his heels into the ground, but the mud mixed with oil made him slip. His fingernails scraped against a fallen sheet of metal, but the tentacles squeezed his arms with such force that he heard a dull crack of his own, own bones giving away. Pain exploded through his entire body, but there was no time to process it. Another yank robbed him of his last shred of balance. And then he saw the final destination, Shiraki's open chest, pulsing and contracting like a starving organism, its jagged edges moving in and out in a sick rhythm. From inside came the damp heat and muffled breathing, as if something was only waiting for its prey to come close enough. With every second, Midoriya was dragged closer. The sound of the heart, the heavy, rhythmic thumping, grew louder, filling everything, drowning out even the wind. It was like being swallowed, not by a mouth, but by an entire world made of living flesh, enveloped by a suffocating, hot, sticky cocoon. Midoriya felt like he was being submerged alive into the sea of viscera. The heat wasn't just physical. It sank into the bones, pulsing the same rhythm as the malevolent heart, sinking with his own heartbeat as if trying to replace it. The space was tight, the slick, pulsating walls closing in on him, pressing against every joint, every open wound. Black slime dripped over his face, seeping into his mouth and nose, burning like acid and leaving a metallic, bitter taste that made him gag. He tried to spit it out, but the vicious filth clung to his tongue, like it had a will of its own, sliding back down his throat. The sound around him was muffled but constant, a wet gurgling, the slow tearing of tissue, and the heavy pounding of the heart. So close he could feel the vibration shaking through his ribcage. The air, if could even be called that, was saturated with a putrid stench, every breath feeling like a sentence of poisoning. The pressure increased. The organic walls closed tighter, breaking and popping, compressing him until his shoulders threatened to dislocate. The pain was no longer in waves, it was constant, a burning blade running through every nerve. Every breath felt like he was inhaling his own life out of himself, and deep within him some consciousness or instinct was watching him from inside that living flesh, as if Shigaraki, or what was left of him, was still there, feeling every spasm, every breath savoring his despair. The air inside that organic prison was thick, almost solid. Every attempt to inhale seemed to fill his lungs not with oxygen but with a hot, suffocating mass that burned from the inside. The pressure kept building, forcing his bones to creak and his joints to bend against his will. There was a low, almost imperceptible sound around him, a deep, uneven murmur like voices trying to speak through dense liquid. Shapeless words formed and broke apart like echoes of memories that weren't his. The living wall pressing against his face pulsed as if it had a heart of its own, and with each beat, Midoriya felt something crawling over his skin, a sticky sensation, like thousands of tiny roots or microscopic tentacles trying to burrow into his pores. He tried to turn his head, but there was no space to move. Every muscle he strained was met with an even tighter contraction from the prison, wrapping around him as if trying to mold him into its shape. Claustrophobia mixed with primal panic. It was as if Shigaraki's very body was trying to absorb him, not just physically, but erasing, piece by piece, who he was. For a moment, he felt himself falling. There was no ground, no gravity, but the sensation of plummeting into an endless abyss, where the very concept of up and down didn't exist. The heat around him began to change. It was no longer like ink in water, their colors bleeding into a deep, throbbing red that pulsed to a beat of the monstrous heart. Midoriya tried to scream, but there was no sound. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, as if even his voice had been stolen from him. The only thing left was the beat, heavy, slow, like a hammer striking the center of his mind, counting down until there was no thought left, only instinct. And then, even instinct was gone. The fall stopped. There was no more light, no more heat, no more cold. Only a thought, an absolute silence that felt eternal, like the universe itself had forgotten he had existed. And that was it for chapter 2, The Final Flame, part 3 of After the Fall by Innocent with one N underscore reader. Now I'm not sure when this will be posted since I'm really just pre-recording everything because like this is kind of a hobby that no one in my family or anyone knows since I'm recording when everyone else is out of the house or busy. So there will be a period of time where I'll post like once or twice a week instead of 2 or 3 times because my grandparents will be out out of town, and I'll have to help my parents with some work. Don't worry, it's legal. I promise. It's not child labor or anything. I just help around, and yeah. So since I'm just telling you guys, since it's gonna, if I post this like after February, then this part is gonna be deleted. But if I remember, in nearing like the end of February, start of March, I think, my post will be slowing down, and yeah, so expect that, and yeah. Now on to the one blooper I have. You almost